All right. So is having a CBDC system that is compatible with that of foreign financial systems, whether it be like their traditional commercial banking system or so on, is it really worth your privacy to be able to have that kind of advantage, right? And I wouldn't really say it's an advantage. Just in general, it really depends on your point of view. But really, where I'm going with this is basically have the drawbacks of having a CBDC that is interoperable with other financial systems, right? And so to kind of define interoperability in this respect, we're going to pull it directly from a paper from the Office of Science and Technology from the White House, and they define interoperability as referring to whether and how a CBDC system can communicate, execute transactions, or transfer data with other payment systems. For example, like other fiat systems, like commercial banking system, maybe even that of foreign countries, right? So international payment systems. Other CBDC systems that a foreign country may have developed for themselves, or even other digital asset systems, right? So such as like stablecoins, right? Things like that. Because I've started to notice when you're looking at the arguments for CBDCs and stuff, it seems like they bring up stablecoins a lot, right? Which is why I've kind of started to go over them as well on kind of like I guess a parallel basis, if you want to talk about it like that. But really, the point of interoperability is to be able to have the CBDC system communicate with those other systems, and basically both the user and the US CBDC system itself don't have to understand completely every little characteristic of that other system, like the data structures or whatever they have, right? Or how they're structuring their payments, the standards, that sort of thing, right? They don't have to understand that to be able to communicate with it and function, right? So that being said, this is different. That being said, interoperability is different from that of integration, right? Integration is more of like the direct kind of access to it. They completely kind of mesh together, whereas interoperability is basically those systems can just communicate with another. They don't have to, they have the ability to basically treat each system as kind of a black box where they don't have to know the how it works inside. It's just kind of like they can communicate. They just need input and output, and that's it, right? So major drawbacks, right, is kind of the crux of the video of having a more interoperable CBDC system, right? And so one of the biggest ones would be these interconnections, right? Maybe even including intermediaries could be difficult to manage, right? Because you're adding complexity with the more interoperable kind of characteristics you could have. With being able to communicate and deal with all these different standards and so on, for other payment systems, it makes it much more complex, and therefore harder to implement, right? Which, depending on your point of view, might not always be a bad thing. But by increasing the complexity itself, if we have to deal with it anyway, it would be harder to fix, harder to start up, and harder to improve, right? And so, especially the improvement in being able to fix problems that arise, because I mean, like any kind of system, anything, period. When you make anything new, there's going to be problems. It's not going to work 100% correctly or perfect, and the odds of it, even if it does at one point, arguably, it's not going to forever, right? Basically until the very far future. It's not. Problems are going to arise, and that's with everything, right? And so, but by having this interoperability, especially to a significant degree, you make it much more difficult to just function and maintain in general, right? Which is something we have to keep in mind. And that, I think that's a major drawback. And so another one would be the kind of peer-to-peer optionality for the CBDC would be much less incentivized to be implemented, right? This was one of the things I was actually quite surprised in reading the White House paper in this respect, is they actually brought up a peer-to-peer kind of transaction compatibility where that could possibly be an option, which I didn't think they would put in there at all, to be honest. But it is in there. Not very much, but it's in there, right? And with that being said, I will link the actual paper itself from the Office of Science and Technology of the White House in the description below, so you guys can read it yourself. It's like 60 pages, goes over different, I think it's 18 total US design choices for a potential US CBDC. Right, and they say that multiple times, like this is potential. This isn't saying, like we're planning on doing a CBDC. It's kind of like doing the academic or intellectual research, so to say, and just kind of look at each individual design choice and so on, right? That's really the point of the paper and these videos as well, right? So to continue on, another major drawback with having a CBDC with more interoperability is really privacy and security, right? And I think this is one of the more, I think this is one of the biggest issues, right? And so because you're making more interlinkages between our potential CBDC system and other payment systems, foreign, whatever the case may be, we've already given examples, right? You're increasing the surface of attack for like cybersecurity problems, right? Basically, people can come in and attack it in a way or try to kind of harvest data and that sort of thing. So privacy is a major concern, right? Who gets access to the data, even just in the system itself. And we'll go over more of that specifically in a set of privacy videos that are kind of down the pipeline, right? And so that will be talked about. But with respect to interoperability, it really increases the attack surface, right? Which is really kind of the harping point. And also it would increase the interdependence between the different entities within the system, right? Again, increasing the attack surface, and making it more complex. And also if one entity isn't as strict or falls short of their kind of compliance issues or their security protocols and that sort of thing, then that can really basically can make a systemic problem with the other entities in the CBDC system as well, which is something you really want to avoid when you're talking about basically adding another almost monetary system in a way, because especially with the talk of like being able to implement monetary policy through a CBDC system, again, this is going to be kind of more in depth in future videos, trying to stay kind of on topic at least. Really have to deal with that. And really what the past, I guess, minute or two has been about is really increasing counterparty risk within the system, because that's something you really have to keep in mind. And by having more interoperability, you're increasing the counterparty risk as well, because you have more counterparties. Those counterparties may have different standards and that sort of thing, because that's the whole point of being interoperable, is the system that you're dealing with is different, right? And so therefore you kind of intrinsically have different standards, or to varying degrees depending on how they set theirs up or how the other system is set up in general, right? So you really have to deal with that. And you can also kind of see how this is closely tied to anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorism compliance, right? Because you're dealing with stuff like cross-border payments and that sort of thing, right? With this interoperability, really kind of focusing on like the international payment system itself, in that respect. But that's a major kind of, I'll say, selling point for CBDCs in general, is kind of the whole financial inclusion and cross-border payments route, right? And so you're really having to deal with that compliance for regulation. And this is where it gets closely tied to the design choice for intermediation, because that really kind of defines on who has to deal with this compliance. Is it going to be more of like the government, or are we going to leave that up to the Fed, right? Or is it going to be like, the commercial banking system or other kind of payments entities that are already having to deal with this compliance to begin with, right? And just kind of adding another system to them for them to deal with? Or is kind of like a new industry going to come up and the new businesses who will do it itself, right? Or even branch off from current ones, whatever it happens to be. Again, who knows? But one thing that really opened my eyes one thing about this that really took me by surprise is they're talking about even counterfeiting CBDC, which is like, if this is going to be like a central bank digital currency, it's like, how do you counterfeit that? And basically what they're talking about is being able to double spend, right? So basically like you can spend it and basically manufacture your account in a way that it doesn't actually show, and so you can spend the same currency twice in a way. That's how they're kind of defining counterfeiting in this respect. And again, I'm being kind of, I guess, elusive and superficial on how exactly I'm describing it, because it really depends on how the token itself is structured. Is it account-based, token-based, whatever, right? And that's going to be kind of more in depth when we get to that part, right? And we start talking about those design choices in future videos, right? And so really the biggest takeaway, I think, for this of having the drawbacks of a CBDC with more interoperability is really the increasing of the attack surface. I don't know why I keep saying service, for privacy and security, right? Because you're increasing the counterparty risk, the interdependence between different entities, and just the amount of attack points in general. I think that's really kind of the biggest point or the biggest drawback for this kind of stuff, right? So that being said, I also did a video on the benefits of having a more interoperable CBDC, right? Because there are benefits as well, right? And not all completely kind of counter to what the drawbacks are, right? Not entirely. So I'll put that as a card up in the corner for the end screen. And with that being said, if you kind of enjoy these little kind of deep dives in a way, going more in depth on each individual design choice and really trying to understand the drawbacks and the benefits and that sort of thing for each possible design choice and how they would work together, don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments, maybe if you have questions or if there's just comments and maybe something you've thought about it. Maybe you think differently about a design choice and that sort of thing. Again, a lot of the information and kind of ideas for these videos are coming from data like straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So I'm using like actual like papers from the White House, from the BIS, from the Federal Reserve, like those kind of entities, right? And those are really what I'm using to kind of formulate that opinion, because they're kind of in charge of it in a way, and so to be able to understand where they're coming from and what they think, I think is really important, right? And so I'll also do videos probably in the future of more like, I guess, personal opinion stuff, especially as I get further and further along in these, to really kind of gain a deeper understanding of every little possible thing you can about where this could possibly be going, right? So with that being said, don't forget to subscribe and all that kind of stuff. And I hope I'll see you guys in the next video. And I'd love your guys' feedback. So hope you guys have a good night.